President-elect Donald J. Trump.
God spared my life for a reason. And that reason was to save our country.
A very warm welcome to our special BBC coverage of Donald Trump's second inauguration. I'm Sumi Somaskanda.
And I'm Katrina Perry here at the Capitol. Thanks for being with us. Well, Donald Trump has been sworn in as America's 47th president, beginning a second term in the White House in which he is promising to reshape America. He's only the second U.S. president ever to serve 2 non-consecutive terms.
In his inaugural address, he promised the golden age of America begins right now. He outlined a raft of executive orders he said he would sign immediately, including the declaration of a national emergency at the border with Mexico. The new president spoke about his political comeback as well, saying he was proof that nothing was impossible. Now, in a break with convention, the inauguration ceremony was held indoors in the Capitol Rotunda because of the exceptionally cold winter temperatures. At 78, Mr. Trump has overtaken his predecessor, Joe Biden, as the oldest U.S. president to take office.
And just while we're talking here, we're watching live pictures coming to us from Capitol Hill. We can see Don Jr. there, Donald Trump Jr., and his father's pick for the Director of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, there just a moment ago. He's going into the office of the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. That luncheon just breaking up on Capitol Hill. One of the sort of protocol moments, if you like, from this inauguration day. We had the swearing-in ceremony earlier. We heard that inaugural address from Donald Trump. Then, in what was different to usual, he went to an overflow room at the Capitol with 1,800 people had been watching proceedings on a big screen because, as we've said, everything has moved indoors because of the cold weather conditions here in Washington, D.C. So you're just looking at images there of that lunch breaking up members of Congress and Donald Trump's team and family there, just parting ways before they move to the next phase of today's proceedings, which will be moving to that Capital One arena nearby. Well, before the inauguration happened this morning, the outgoing president, Joe Biden, issued preemptive pardons for 5 members of his family, for his siblings. In a statement, the outgoing president warned that they had been subjected to unrelenting attacks and threats. And those pardons followed another set that had been issued to the COVID response chief, Anthony Fauci, and to members of the House January 6th riot investigation to prevent what President Biden called politically motivated prosecutions. Now, we can have a look at the live scene coming to us from the Capital One arena, which is, as I say, where proceedings will move to shortly. That is the venue for the inauguration celebrations. About 20,000 people are expected to gather at that Capital One arena. We're not seeing the images just now. We're still looking at those images of the various members of Congress leaving that celebration, that celebratory lunch that was being held there to celebrate the inauguration of Donald Trump. But let's have a listen now to some of what President Trump said in his inaugural address a little earlier.
From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world. We will be the envy of every nation, and we will not allow ourselves to be taken advantage of any longer. During every single day of the Trump administration, I will very simply put America first. Our sovereignty will be reclaimed. Our safety will be restored. The scales of justice will be rebalanced. The vicious, violent, and unfair weaponization of the Justice Department and our government will end. And our top priority will be to create a nation that is proud, prosperous, and free.
And indeed, Donald Trump, they're delivering that inaugural address in the Capitol Rotunda just about 4 hours ago when he was sworn in as the 47th president, Donald Trump. They're saying that the golden age of America will begin, the decline of America is over. Well, let's go to our correspondent, Gary O'Donoghue, who is at the Capital One Arena, where, as we said, as Donald Trump has wrapped up that congressional luncheon and everyone is filing out there, he is expected to head next to the Capital One Arena. And Gary, we understand that there are a lot of people on hand, tens of thousands, thousands of people on hand. Of course, it only holds 20,000 people, but give us a sense of the mood there on the ground.
Well, they're pretty pumped, I would say. They've had a few interesting warm-up acts so far. Elon Musk was here a few moments ago, and if you think a new golden age is an exercise in hyperbole, he actually said that Trump supporters had saved human civilization by this victory. Human civilization, which he said would now be planted on Mars, thanks to Donald Trump's aspirations and Elon Musk's expertise, I guess. So they've heard from him. They heard from Kash Patel, the nominee for FBI director, who actually, interestingly, was a lot more kind of traditional, talking about crime and fighting crime and overdoses and drugs and things like that. None of the retribution and revenge stuff that we've heard from him before. But they're waiting for Donald Trump. This will be the third bite of the cherry, of course, from the day. You've outlined the inaugural itself and then that slightly riffing kind of speech he made to those other people in the Capitol as well. I think we'll get another campaign performance here. We had it yesterday. I think we'll get something very similar again. What we will get, of course, is the theatrics of signing some of these executive orders on stage in front of these 20,000 people. And I'm sure that will please them enormously.
Gary, as we're speaking, we're looking at images still in the Capitol there of the military review, which is also part of the proceedings for a traditional inaugural day. But Gary, as you said, you know, it is pretty unusual, let's say unprecedented, to see a president go to sign executive orders in front of around 20,000 supporters. Just tell us a bit more about what you think we can expect to see there. We've already heard, of course, from the Trump administration that they expect to talk about the border, about energy, about regulation.
Yeah, we'll see which ones he does here. I mean, I tell you one thing that was interesting when he was making his speech and the crowd here was watching it. The thing that got the biggest cheer was this whole idea, as he put it, of bringing biological truth back to the federal government. And by that he means that he thinks that there are only two genders, men and women, and it's time to re-establish that idea. That got an absolutely huge cheer and round of applause on their feet for that one. So I wonder if they're saving some of that, if you like, that sort of culture war stuff for the actual sort of supporters who are here. We'll see. We'll see. They're also very keen on the border stuff, as you can imagine. That's a very popular message. And maybe something around the cost of living, because that is something Donald Trump has also promised to do. But of course, bringing down prices, controlling prices, much easier said than done.
Okay, Gary O'Donoghue there at the Capital One Arena. We'll be back to you plenty more times before the night is over. President Donald Trump still here at the Capitol, but that is his next stop there where Gary is. Well, I'm joined now by Democratic Congressman from Ohio, Greg Landsman. Congressman, thanks indeed for joining us here on BBC News. Just to pick up on that point that my colleague Gary was just making, that remark that President Trump said in his inaugural address, saying it will henceforth be the official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female. What do you make of that remark?
I think that it's something that is, some of the folks, in his party are really fired up about. Most people are just trying to, figure out how they're going to, pay all their bills, what's going to happen to their health care. They are worried about the border. They're worried about all kinds of, big issues globally in the United States and their own lives. I don't think most voters want us to focus on these culture war issues. And so, Yeah, he got a big applause in the rotunda too, from members of his own party. But I was surprised that he didn't talk about the economy that much, or even the border. I mean, he rambled, and I'm not a partisan guy. I just, I thought it was kind of a strange, grim, unoriginal, kind of strange speech. At one point, I think he talked about renaming a mountain. So I don't know.
Here, just over at the White House, where, of course, the president will shift to a little bit later in the day. But, Congressman, what voters are certainly interested in, if you looked at polling surrounding election, was indeed immigration. And although the president didn't talk as much about immigration in that speech, we know that those initial executive orders will be heavily focused on curbing immigration. Do you support these orders and what Donald Trump wants to do, a national emergency at the border, mass deportation?
Yeah, I don't know what national emergency means. I mean, I think he needs to work with the United States Congress to pass actual laws. I'm a big supporter of the bipartisan border fix, which would hire thousands of additional Border Patrol officers. It would hire more judges, a whole host of changes. If they want to add to the wall, they can add to the wall. They need congressional action. There needs to be laws, new laws, to tackle border security and ultimately comprehensive immigration reform. Some of the policies make sense. The mass deportation work. I don't actually believe him. I don't think he's going to do much more than what we've been doing with ICE and removing those who are breaking additional laws. And most Americans want to see that. If you've come here unlawfully and you've gotten arrested for a second crime, you've got to go home.
And Congressman, just on that issue, those immigration points and border security, given a state like your own in Ohio, there are issues in parts of the smaller towns with fentanyl, as there are in many parts across the middle of America and all around the country, in truth. Would you have expected to hear the president address that in the context of border security?
Yeah, I mean, this is where I was a little frustrated, not as a Democrat, but as an American. These inauguration addresses are an opportunity to paint a picture of where we're going to go and what we're going to get done and how we're going to do it together. And it's sort of a roadmap to solving some of our most intractable or difficult challenges. And so, I was hoping he would lay out a plan, a real vision for fixing the economy. A plan and a real vision for fixing the border. And the fact that fentanyl, for example, didn't come up, or any specifics outside of returning to remain in Mexico, and I think that, quite frankly, was the only border specific, was disappointing. I mean, we need serious leadership, and I didn't hear a lot of that in the speech, but. Look, we have a new president. I'm committed to working with everyone to get things done, and doing so in a way that helps people and serves as a firewall to ensure that no one gets hurt.
Okay, Congressman, great to have you back on BBC News. Thank you again so much for joining us this afternoon. All right, and on your screens there, we are still seeing that lineup there in the Capitol for the military review. Don't forget that the president is also the commander-in-chief, and this is a traditional part of inaugural day ceremonies. Now, here in Washington, D.C., we know that initially, for the initial inauguration ceremony, around 250,000 tickets were handed out for people to take part in the ceremony, to be sitting on the National Mall to take in the inauguration ceremony. So we saw supporters of Donald Trump around the country flock here to Washington, D.C. And many of them, of course, couldn't fit in that Capital One arena, but they have been going to different watch parties. And indeed, it took me quite a long time to get here to the White House location from the Capitol because of so many people streaming out and about on the streets. But our colleague, Helena Humphrey, is at a pub not far from us here in D.C. She's been speaking to people there about how they're taking in the inauguration. Helena, tell us what they've been telling you.
Well, so
Sumi, of course, the fact that this inauguration had to move inside was pretty good news for bars and restaurants here in Washington, D.C. We are at the Union Pub. This is a self-proclaimed bipartisan bar in the heart of the nation's capital. A pretty festive atmosphere, I have to say. Perhaps you can even spot behind me quite a few people wearing Make America Great Again hats. Some people have come from the inauguration themselves, telling me the atmosphere was electric. But let's bring in now some of the people who've been enjoying the ambience here. Where have you come from today, sir?
What an unbelievable day today, making America great again.
And where did you travel from?
I traveled from Michigan.
And why was it important for you to come from Michigan to be here today?
Well, what a historical celebration. We're going to watch Donald Trump do what he said he was going to do. And now with the vice president, he picked Vance. That looks like we got 12 good years of America.
And what are your hopes for the next 4 years?
I hope the border gets cleaned up with a border wall. I hope that the EPA and like Eagle DEQ in the world gets slowed down for all, because I'm a farmer from Michigan. So we have a lot of regulations that are super hard to deal with.
Let me bring in some of your friends who you've been hanging out with here. Nice to see you. Thank you for being with us. How's the day been going for you?
Oh, it's awesome. It's been a perfect day.
And what are your hopes for the next 4 years?
Oh, man, I just hope, I'm ready for some positivity. I'm so tired of all the negative things in the world. We all can be all one. Trump's going to bring everybody together instead of dividing everybody. We all bleed red and we're all brothers and sisters, and we just need to love each other and just think positive. If we all work together, we can make this country beautiful.
Any concerns about the next term ahead?
I just hope that we all can work together. My only concern is the Democrats and the Republicans need to work together, and this could be the most awesome country.
I want to bring in your friend. I think it was Mike who was standing over here as well. Mike, just quickly, briefly, how's the day been for you? Why was it important to be here?
It's been awesome. President Trump pulled off the biggest political comeback in U.S. history. It's just a good thing to witness and see.
Thank you so much for being with us. And that is a word I have heard, Sumi, throughout the course of the afternoon here. The fact that people feel that it was a comeback, and as you can see, for the most part, they're celebrating that. All right, Helen, I certainly get a sense of how people are feeling there. Helena Humphrey for us in a bar not far from where we are. Here is Donald Trump at the military review taking place in the Capitol right now. You see Melania Trump. Let's listen in.
So we're What we're watching here is President Donald Trump observing the first honors ceremony from members of the US military there. This part would usually take place outdoors as part of that presidential parade, but obviously given proceedings have been moved indoors. It's happening in Emancipation Hall in the Capitol Hill Visitor Center. The eagle-eyed among you will note that this is the place that was used earlier as the overflow hall for those watching the swearing-in ceremony. So President Trump just there saluting. He's now inspecting the troops as he's moving along there. They were playing Hail to the Chief just a moment ago. from the president inspecting these troops. As I say, this would usually be done outside as part of the presidential parade. He would have moved down Pennsylvania Avenue in his motorcade and then taken his seat in a viewing stand that has been under construction outside the White House since October or thereabouts. The first nail was driven on the stand here at the Capitol Hill behind me on September 18th. That's how long ago the construction starts for this day, well before anyone knows who in fact is going to be the president. But that viewing stand at Freedom Plaza on Pennsylvania Avenue and the one outside the White House not being used. We can see here President Trump walking along and inspecting those troops, saluting them on occasion, and the various branches of the US military all represented there. Of course, Donald Trump, not just the 47th president of the United States, he is the commander-in-chief of the US military, the biggest military in the world, and all the branches of it there represented in Emancipation Hall in Capitol Hill in the visitor centre there. And he's just returning to that platform to his wife, First Lady Melania Trump, and standing behind him there we have various members of the congressional leadership. We have the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, and his wife. We have Steve Scalise and his wife, Senator Amy Klobuchar, who of course is the chair of the Inauguration Committee, and Senator Deb Fisher there as well, all of whom have had roles various sorts in today's proceedings. This is the final official act that will take place at Capitol Hill here, and in just a few moments' time President Trump will leave here to make his way just the short distance, just a couple of blocks, to the Capital One Arena, which has been filling up with Donald Trump's supporters since very early this morning, since before dawn. They watched proceedings on the big screen and they are awaiting the arrival of the man of the hour, President Donald Trump, shortly. And we can go live to the Capital One Arena now to speak to Illinois Republican State Representative Reagan Deering, who is inside the arena at the moment, one of those coveted spots, because of course we know about 220,000 tickets were issued for the proceedings when they were outdoors, just 20,000 people inside the Capital One Arena. And Reagan, what is the atmosphere like there at the moment?
Well, it's absolutely electric here in Capital One Arena. So many amazing patriots have been recognized for their grit and determination to get inside this arena today. And I feel blessed and honored to be one of the ones sitting nearby.
Because it's very cold, as we've been discussing all day here in Washington, D.C. And people have travelled from all corners of the country very early this morning, queuing up for a spot inside there to celebrate this inauguration of Donald Trump. He'll make his way there shortly. What are you expecting to hear from him when he gets there?
Well, it's been a nice opportunity to watch on the Jumbotron this morning's proceedings in the Capitol, as well as Trump talking to the offset room as well. The man is very good off script. I think he will continue to talk directly to the American people who have shown up for him in great numbers for the November election, as well as here in the arena today. So I think that he's going to speak to a new agenda for him. He's been waiting a long 4 years, as have all of us that have been his supporters through the Biden administration, to get back to common sense priorities. And so I think people are ready to hear about securing the border. It's my understanding he's been signing a handful of executive orders back at the Capitol. There is, in fact, a small Resolute type desk on the corner of the stage here in Capital One Arena. So it is likely that he will let the audience participate in working for them again.
And for you and the constituents that you represent in Illinois, what is the #1 issue that you want to see him address?
Well, I think that as those who voted him in and have joined the Republican Party, being some independents, some Democrats, we're ready to get back to a government that works for the people. Illinois is known for its high taxes, pension debt, overregulation by our government. So we're happy to have Republicans from Illinois here in the capital city today, and just going to do all we can to support him in his efforts to make the country great, as well as all of the 50 states. And so I think that when we as Illinoisans can feel that energy and feel that shift back towards common sense governance and regulations, we're ready to stand up to the majority party in Illinois that has been crushing our families. And I'll look to deliver on my promises to get back to working for the people.
We didn't hear a lot from President Trump in relation to the economy in his inaugural address. He did mention about taxation and tariffs, such as it related to foreign countries. But do you expect that perhaps he might address that in more detail when he gets to where you are there at the Capital One Arena, given that it was the issue that so many voters said in November was the driving force to get them to the polls?
Yeah, I think you're right. We did have the incoming Secretary of Commerce speak to both the External Revenue Service and some of those tariffs agendas and saving more Americans their own hard-earned money. I think that Trump's plan to, secure the border and stop spending recklessly on those who have entered our country illegally, especially in Illinois, where they have shown up as a sanctuary state, that's looking to save our taxpayers millions of dollars. I think one of his other big priorities is energy independence. We've done it before, and I think he'll look to bring that back again, so people can start saving at the pump, saving at the grocery store, and feeling like they have the opportunity to keep more of their hard-earned dollars.
Indeed, he did talk about declaring a national energy emergency during that inaugural address. And Reagan Deering, Illinois State Representative, thank you so much for joining us here on BBC News. As we're speaking, we're looking at pictures of President Trump just about to leave the Capitol building. So he is soon on his way over to where you and your constituents that you were talking about are waiting for him there in the Capital One Arena. And just the final few moments here on Capitol Hill, that inspection of US troops. And he will soon be preparing to get into the motorcade to head to the Capital One Arena.
Indeed, Katrina, as we've been looking at these images, the military has featured strongly in some of what Donald Trump has talked about in his executive orders. And in that rally at the Capital One Arena on Sunday, he talked about the need to rid the military of what he called woke policies. He said it was time to get rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion policies that he said had ruined the military. Indeed, on the stage, there was even a clip played of what he believed was showing how the military was once a picture of strength and force and had been undermined by some of these diversity policies. But let's bring in again some of our panelists who are joining us. Margaret Talib is still with us. Former Republican Congressman Jacob Turner is with us, and Democrat strategist Joy Cheney is also with us. Congressman, I want to start with you and just get your take, first of all, on what we have seen from Donald Trump, this messaging about the golden age of America and this flurry of executive orders.
Great to be with you. Listen, I think that 77 million Americans that voted for Donald Trump are extremely happy right now. They have been concerned with the direction of this country for the last 4 years under Joe Biden. They've been worried about the border, crimes in their communities, the economy, inflation, and they hear a new message. They see President Trump, who he did not hide his message today. He delivered it in a very strong and direct way. And so there is a sigh of relief among a huge sector of the country today that there is a new day in America, that it can be a golden age. And so there's a lot of optimism across the country right now.
Joy, what's your thought on that? Obviously, as a Democrat strategist, a very different day for Democrats as they saw Joe Biden departing the White House.
Yeah, there's, a sigh of relief by many Americans. There's a sigh of anguish by many Americans. I have a friend who has a transgender daughter who, cried today because their life is going to look very different. And there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear if you are a person who has family members who may be undocumented, and maybe you have been law-abiding and you've been doing all the things. There's a fear for Black women like me who have, like many women, not just people of color, like many women, benefited from equity programs that were seeking to acknowledge us for our merit and to reduce the impacts of racism and misogyny and sexism and ableism and homophobia. And what Donald Trump said today is, those are good things, and we want to bring those things back. And that, at least that's what we heard. And so, yeah, he was strong and he was clear. And so a lot of celebration by some, a lot of anguish by others. But didn't hear a lot about the economy, which is interesting. I hope certainly that he's going to address that.
As you've been speaking, Joy, we're just looking at images here of Donald Trump departing the Capitol. Look, he's shaking hands with Democrat Senator Chuck Schumer as he's heading out. He's also, I think, just about to shake hands with the House Minority Leader, Democrat Hakeem Jeffries, as well, congressman from the state of New York. He has been surrounded by congressional leaders at this congressional luncheon, and one of his close allies, Republican Congressman Steve Scalise, as well, bidding him farewell here as Donald Trump is getting set. And I believe there is John Thune as well, Senate Majority Leader. This all, of course, after the congressional luncheon wrapped up in the Capitol, and Donald Trump carried out that review of the military, that ceremony that we saw in the Capitol. And from here, as he's holding these conversations with Senator Thune, he's about to head in his car to the Capital One Arena. As we know, thousands of people are waiting for him there. So those are the images we're looking at right now as Donald Trump is wrapping up this official portion of the day in the Capitol, heading over to the arena. We just heard that people are waiting there anxiously to see the president. Margaret, I just want to get your take on something we heard from Joy there, and that we heard also from Ohio Congressman Greg Landsman, that they didn't feel that there was much discussed on the economy in Donald Trump's inaugural address. Do you agree? And do you think that there was perhaps more focus on other issues because the economy is going to be, particularly bringing down those grocery prices, for example, one of the challenges?
Yeah, I mean, it's notable. I think there are two things. If you were paying a lot of attention in the closing weeks of the campaign and then you took a long winter slumber and woke up today, there are two things that you would have expected to hear a lot about that we really didn't hear about in any detail. And one is those big, beautiful tariffs that we initially thought we were going to see on day one. And the other was that Trump, once upon a time, President Trump suggested he could end the war in Ukraine in the first 24 hours of his presidency. We're going to see a bit of a pause, a reset, and a different pace on those issues, and in particular tariffs. It does appear that many of his own appointees with economic experience, some of the billionaires, there's 13 billionaires he's appointed to serve in his administration, and some of them have sort of implored him to take a different look at the way he thinks about the application of tariffs on specific goods, not just country by country, in order to not significantly shake or weaken the U.S. economy while he's trying to carry out sort of trade and foreign policy issues. So, but I also do think, to your point, that inflation was an amazing campaign issue for him to run on because people felt the pain of inflation. And President Biden, former President Biden and his administration were not able to successfully communicate across the board to Americans the idea that while inflation was painful for them, there were strong fundamentals in the economy that would carry America through this sort of post-COVID era. And instead, people felt real pain. I can't pay my rent. Interest rates are high. I can't buy a house. My paycheck doesn't stretch as far. Eggs are expensive, et cetera. The previous administration just didn't
and indeed,
acknowledge
Margaret, that was. I mean, we've talked we've talked about it, you and I and many others on our programs here over the past few months, that was really the key issue. You know, we were traveling around, I was in all of those 7 swing states, and time and again, that is what voters were saying. I just can't afford to feed my family the way I used to. I can't afford to put petrol in my car the way I used to. I can't afford a new car. I can't afford a holiday. And we saw that in the exit polling and in the polling before the election, that this was the key thing of concern to people. We're just looking at pictures now of President Trump in that motorcade. He's just left Capitol Hill after all of those various ceremonial duties that he discharged there over the last number of hours, and the motorcade is now making its way along through this corner of Washington DC from Capitol Hill past Union Station, the train station, a very beautiful ornate station. Anyone who's been to Washington on the train will have travelled through there and admired it, no doubt. Big restoration project recently, and the motorcade just making a very short journey to the Capital One Arena, a sporting arena here in Washington DC that has seen highs and lows with the various basketball and ice hockey teams over the years there, and today we'll see a big high for the supporters of President Donald Trump, just a few hours now into his second term in office. They've just turned onto Pennsylvania Avenue. What's notable about this view we're looking at here, we've got an aerial shot of a deserted street. Ordinarily, the way things would run, if the weather wasn't so bad and so cold and everything hadn't been moved indoors, the streets here would be lined with people. The rooftops, you can see some of them are lined with people in those office buildings, and many of them are broadcasters as well. But those streets would ordinarily be lined full of people, and you can just see at the top of the screen there is Freedom Plaza, a big viewing stand constructed there, and that would also have been full of people cheering on and celebrating and waving at President Trump there. And on occasion, presidents have walked part of this journey as well, stopping to wave and shake hands with their supporters who make a pilgrimage essentially to Washington DC to see their person installed in the White House. And you can see the motorcade just turning right there, and it will head up just a couple of blocks to that Capital One Arena, where, as we've been hearing throughout the day on our programming here, people have been queuing from early morning, the wee hours of the morning, in pitch dark conditions up to -10 degrees Celsius, for a chance to get into the Capital One Arena, because 230,000 tickets were issued initially for the inauguration ceremony. The mall would have been filled, as I say, these streets would have been filled with people, and instead only 20,000 people have the opportunity to be in the Capital One Arena for this moment that's about to happen now, which will be very special for President Trump and for his supporters, to have a glimpse of the new president, to hear from him, and as has been flagged by the man himself and many of his campaign team speaking to us here and his advisors, that he will be signing some memoranda, some executive orders or executive actions on some of those key policy issues, some of the key platforms that he ran on in this election campaign, and that his supporters, the 77 million Americans who voted for him, want him to take action on. And he has pledged that he will take that action on day one. And here we are on day one as we watch this motorcade travel along the streets of Washington DC. You can get a sense of just how intense the security operation is around this inauguration. It always is, but of course this year we had that assassination attempt on President Trump in July, and you can just see there he is arriving the Capital One Arena into the loading dock down in underneath into the bowels of the stadium. Large motorcade there. It will take a couple of minutes for him to disembark from that motorcade for the area to be sealed, and then we'll see him arrive up into that Capital One Arena, in onto the floor of that sporting arena, where many of his allies and advisors have been speaking throughout the day already, rallying up the crowd in anticipation of this moment. And we will bring that to you as soon as he comes out into the arena. But while we're waiting, we just have a quick look here. You can see what's going on inside the arena at the moment. Again, military band, they're keeping everyone occupied and entertained and keeping the spirits high because, of course, this has been a very long day for the individuals inside this Capital One arena. Queued from the early hours, and then they've sat through all of the proceedings, watching them on the big screen, that inaugural address and the second address from President Trump. Now, while we're waiting for President Trump there, I want to bring in BBC's political editor, Chris Mason. Chris, thanks for being with us. People in capitals all around the world, of course, watching this day, listening to what Donald Trump has to say. He addressed a little foreign policy in his inaugural address this morning. Not too many details, but how will it have been received in London?
Yeah, hello to you. The world has changed in America, and I think the world has changed in plenty of other places too because of America's influence and significance. And so here in London, you've had the Prime Minister putting a video out on social media congratulating President Trump in the last couple of hours, talking about what UK Prime Ministers always talk about, which is the so-called special relationship between the UK and the US. But what intrigues me as someone who's going to follow this closely in the coming years is you've got two leaders, one in London, one in Washington, who could not be more different. I mean, it is an extraordinary difference just of character. You've got a human rights lawyer and a brash property billionaire from New York. You've got a barrister against someone who found themselves, in court, as Donald Trump did, and convicted. So the differences of character and style are massive. And then there are the policy differences, which will also be fascinating to observe. And the Middle East, on Ukraine, on trade, tariffs, import taxes. Where exactly are they wielded by the new president? The row over the Chagos Islands, the archipelago in the Indian Ocean, where there's a joint US-UK military base, where the UK government had decided to hand those islands to Mauritius and then rent back the space for the military base. That was paused to allow the new administration to take a look at it. That could be an awkward thing early on. What does the new president say about defence spending? He often wants allies, other NATO members, to spend far more on defence. Can the UK and others afford it? So there's so many strands that are going to be fascinating to unpick. And at the heart of it will be the dynamic, the human dynamic between the two men. And because they are so wildly different, that's going to be fascinating to observe.
And just wanted to get your thoughts, Chris, as well. I've spotted here in Washington, D.C. in recent days former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, former Prime Minister Liz Truss. Nigel Farage is here. He threw a big party for Donald Trump for the inauguration. Donald Trump wasn't there, but for the inauguration on Friday night. So you have this very close relationship between those in the Conservative Party and, as you've been describing there, with the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer.
Yeah, there's a definite difference there. There's just no doubt about it. You have a Prime Minister here who is on the left, describes himself as a socialist, and you have a new US president who is on the right. So there's a difference there, and you see it with the, if you like, the friends from British politics that were invited along, whether it be Nigel Farage or Boris Johnson or Liz Truss. It's quite striking seeing Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister, there in person witnessing the inauguration, because what's interesting is that the two of them, Mr. Johnson and Mr. Trump, clearly struck up a real rapport when they were both in positions of leadership. On the issue of Ukraine, they have been very, very different in their instincts. Boris Johnson very, very passionate about leading the UK's response to Ukraine when there was the full-scale invasion from Russia. And we've heard the scepticism from Donald Trump and his plans to try and bring the conflict to a close pretty quickly. And even though Boris Johnson and Liz Truss are politically very different from Keir Starmer, on the Ukraine question, Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer are in exactly the same place. The British government's position on Ukraine hasn't changed even through successive prime ministers and a change of party governing the UK. But yeah, there's no doubt there is a difference there, a difference of character, different policy instincts, and then different worldview fundamentally.
And of course, all this will have to be navigated by the incoming British ambassador here, Lord Peter Mandelson, and we will wait to see how he handles that when he arrives here in a few weeks' time. For the moment, Chris, thanks as always for your analysis. We'll talk to you again. Now, we are waiting for President Trump to come onto the floor of the Capital One Arena. He has arrived in the building. We're watching scenes just there on the right of your screen of a military band keeping the crowd energized and warmed up. It's been a very long day for them as we await President Trump there. He is going to make some remarks and deliver an address to those gathered. Now, of course, he's promising a flurry of executive actions on day one, and we do expect some of those to be signed in the Capital One Arena shortly. He's promised action on immigration, on energy production, reducing crime, and a host of other issues. He also has heaped criticism on the administration of his predecessor, Joe Biden. We heard that in his inaugural address and in those unscripted remarks that followed. President Trump saying Joe Biden had spent unlimited funds on the defense of foreign borders while refusing to defend the borders of America. And President Trump was greeted with loud cheers throughout his address, particularly at the points when he said he would declare a national emergency at the southern border.
All illegal entry will immediately be halted, and we will begin the process of returning millions and millions of criminal aliens back to the places from which they came. We will reinstate my Remain in Mexico policy. I will end the practice of catch and release. And I will send troops to the southern border to repel the disastrous invasion of our country.
Now, while we're waiting on President Trump, let's go live to Chicago and speak to our correspondent, Carl Nasman. Carl, Chicago, one of the cities in this country that's watching closely for any executive actions that President Trump might start today as it relates to immigration. What's the view on the ground there?
Yeah, absolutely. Chicago is a great place to be to talk about these executive orders and actions that Donald Trump is planning today that have to do with his immigration policy. We just saw a big protest go through downtown Chicago, in part protesting his immigration policy in his second term. And we also know that this could be one of those cities that is targeted by some sort of widespread immigration enforcement or raids that could be coming up in terms of undocumented immigrants. To talk about some of those actions that we're seeing today and in the coming days, we have a guest here with us, Karen Zwick, the Director of Litigation at the National Immigrant Justice Center. Great to have you here. We have a few minutes time to talk about a few of these actions, which I know you've been following closely. In terms of one thing he said today, where he wants to get rid of birthright citizenship, where anyone who's born in the country becomes a U.S. citizen. In your view, is that something that Donald Trump even can do?
Certainly not in the way that he intends to do it, no. And I should start by saying thank you for having me. But yes, certainly not in the way that he intends to do, because it's in the Constitution. Birthright citizenship is in the Constitution, and that is, I'm sure there will be a legal challenge nearly immediately.
There's some more practical on-the-ground measures here, too, that he's talked about. One of them is getting rid of the Joe Biden policy. There was this app that allowed people to actually apply online for something like asylum or immigration. Getting rid of that, what would be the effects of that, do you think?
Sure. So the app you're referring to is something called CBP1. That app was already eliminated. It's actually gone already. And for the past couple of years, that app has been the only way that an individual who came to the U.S.-Mexico border was able to seek asylum at the border. And so with that app gone, there's literally no way for a person who presents himself at the U.S.-Mexico border, no matter their manner of entry, to actually make a request for asylum. So we think that the determination of that app, particularly when coupled with these pre-existing rules, is certainly illegal.
He's been focusing in on some gangs, Latin American groups, too, hasn't he? Designating them as terrorist groups? What do you make of that kind of language in these orders?
Sure. That's another thing that is exceptionally harmful for immigrant communities, not only because many of the people who are coming to the United States to seek asylum, for example, are fleeing from those very organizations. And if you take away the right to a proceeding for somebody who actually can try to explain what their case is about, they're likely to be tagged as a member of those organizations without even having an opportunity to say, it's not that I'm a member of that organization, it's actually that I am fleeing from that organization. So the fact that those announcements are coupled with stripping of the procedural due process protections that an applicant for asylum in particular would seek is just really stark and what we expected.
Let's talk about what's taking place here in Chicago, and we are at the headquarters, of course, of the National Immigrant Justice Center. So I'm sure you've been tracking closely these reports that we could see sometime maybe the next, days or weeks here in Chicago, some sort of immigration raid, immigration authorities coming here to try to gather up those who are undocumented and remove them from the country. What are the legal hurdles when it comes to something like that?
Sure. So we've been hearing all kinds of rumors about what's likely to happen here in Chicago, ranging from 100 officers to several hundred officers, ranging from a couple of days to a multi-week operation. We've heard them say that they're targeting only specific individuals, but we've also heard them say things like they're targeting people who are recent arrivals to the United States who might be living in shelters.
Right.
I'm referencing that because those things matter in terms of what they're allowed to do. Of course, they are allowed to go and pick up a person who is a known target. But what we saw the last time this happened, and again, it's important to remember that we have been here before, exactly here. President Trump announced Tom Homan as his border czar, and Mr. Homan was in charge of operations like this the last time around, where community members who lived in the same household as a person who was on the list, or even just happened to be in the vicinity of a person who was on the list, were also taken into custody, and that is illegal.
Okay.
And that's something that we're very concerned about.
Yeah, lots of concern, obviously, here in Chicago among the immigrant community here, and there's lots of legal concerns playing out. We'll see how all this shakes out in the coming days.
Okay, Carl, thank you very much for that. Interesting to get the view from the ground in Chicago, and I'm delighted to see that you've been able to move indoors and heat up, because it's even colder in Chicago than it is here in Washington, D.C. today. Now, I am joined with by a guest on our rooftop here, Jens Stoltenberg, chairman of the Munich Security Conference, and of course, most recently, the Secretary General of NATO. Thanks so much for being with us here on BBC News. Now, you were listening very closely, I'm sure, to what President Trump was saying in his inaugural address. He didn't give too many specifics in relation to foreign policy, but what did you make of what you heard?
Well, as you said, it was mainly actually about domestic issues. On foreign policy, he didn't say that much. He said something about peace to strength, which is actually a message very much in line with NATO, that we need to be strong, we need to be united to ensure that we preserve peace.
Now, he did speak, again, not specifically, but in a general way, about US taxpayers' money being used to fund and protect borders in other countries, not in this country. A reference potentially to the Ukraine-Russia conflict and perhaps other places. What did you make of that?
Well, that's a message which, of course, raises some questions among European allies and those countries who are supporting Ukraine. Because we all want the war in Ukraine to end. But we know that the quickest way to end the war is to lose a war. But that will not bring peace. That will bring occupation. So therefore, we need to provide weapons to Ukraine to strengthen their position on the battlefield, because that's the only way to convince President Putin that he cannot win, but had to sit down and find a solution where Ukraine prevails as a sovereign independent nation.
And when European leaders were here, as you were last July for the NATO summit, there was a lot of side chatter about if President Trump got re-elected, what that would mean for the European relationship, such as it is for Ukraine. What is the sense now where we are on this day?
I think it's too early to say, because, for instance, his closest advisor and special envoy on Ukraine, Kit Kellogg, has stated very clearly that it has to be a solution based on strength. Again, support Ukraine is the way to convince Putin that he cannot win. I don't think we can change Putin's mind, but I think we can change his calculus. His mind is that he wants to control Ukraine, but his calculus may change if he realizes that the price he has to pay is too high. And it's also, you have to remember that last time President Trump was president, I remember very well because then I was Secretary General of NATO, he actually was the president that decided to start to provide lethal aid to Ukraine, deliver the first javelins, the anti-tank weapons that proved so extremely important when Russia launched a full-fledged invasion. So I think it's a bit too early to say, but I think that the only message to European allies and those countries who want more support to Ukraine is to engage with the new Trump administration, to sit down and to tell that it matters what they do for Ukraine, not only for the Ukrainians, but also for all of us.
And you mentioned General Keith Kellogg there, the incoming US Special Envoy to Ukraine. We had heard from President Trump on the campaign trail that he was going to solve the Ukraine-Russia situation within 24 hours. But we've heard from General Kellogg, he's put a 90-day, middle of May sort of deadline on it. Has there been any further detail about how that might be achieved?
Not much. And again, I think this is very much about strengthening Ukraine to convince Putin that he has to sit down. The problem is not Ukraine. They are invaded by another country. So the problem is Russia. And of course, the situation on the battlefield is difficult. The Russians are pushing. But we need to remember where this started. At the beginning of the war, most experts believed that Russia was going to take Kiev within days and the rest of Ukraine within weeks. That didn't happen. The Ukrainians have liberated 50% of the territory that Russia occupied in the beginning of the war. They're inflicting heavy losses on the Russian occupiers with more than 1,000 casualties per day. And Russia has deployed 80–90% of the land forces, and they have still not been able to control Donbass. So this is not a big success for President Putin.
Okay, well, we'll wait to see, I suppose, what President Trump and his team do from here on out. Chair of the Munich Security Conference, Jens Stoltenberg, thanks so much for being with us here, BBC News in the Cold. We really do appreciate you doing that. Now, plenty more is still to come here. We are awaiting President Donald Trump to come up onto the floor of the Capital One Arena and make some remarks there addressing his supporters, and we'll have that live. Do stay with us here on BBC News.